Well, welcome back to our last homeschooling video with Campbell and Liza, and we are so excited. There's so many questions I know that you guys get around testing and preparing for college and everything in between those last few years of high school. So I know a big question is, what about standardized tests? How do you prepare for them, register for them, and how often do you take them?
Well, in our state, if you homeschool, you're supposed to test in grades 5, 7, and 9. Each state is different. So our first year of homeschooling was 5th grade, and that year we were planning that we would take it year by year, and that she would possibly go back to school for 6th grade. So we wanted to go ahead and do the standardized test for that year. And so I do not remember how we registered for them. I'm pretty sure they sent me a letter and told me when the testing window was, because we had registered for homeschool through our district and not through a private school. So in our state, you have the option to do it that way. You can go through I think it's called an LEA, when you go through your district, and there's a person at central office that you talk to, and they give you the paperwork and everything. And then, so I think they sent me the letter, and I'm pretty sure that's how it worked. And then I took her to the school where she was zoned to attend for the week that they would do normal testing. Of course, they had to arrange accommodations for that, because whatever her previous IEP said is what they had to do, Braille test, extended time, all of that stuff. And I don't know if you didn't have a previous IEP, how that would go. Like, I think you would probably have to have a meeting and come up with those, if it was your first year testing and you hadn't done testing up to that point. So then in 7th grade, our district switched to digital testing. Everything was on a laptop. And at that point, Campbell had not had any assistive technology, because that's when the funding was frozen and all that. So she didn't know how to even turn on a laptop, much less navigate it and do any of that. So I was like, unless you can do this test on an iPad, she's not going to be able to do it. And they were like, well, we'll see if we can get a paper test and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what if we do an umbrella school? So in our state, if you want to homeschool and not have to do testing, you pay, I guess, contract out with an umbrella school. It's so much a year. They vary. Like, there are some that are very hands-on. They'll give you curriculum advice. They check to make sure you're doing everything correctly if that's what you need. Or they'll be more hands-off, and they'll say, okay, it's in your hands and you can do what you need to do, and you just report attendance and grades to us. And that's what we chose, is one that was, they will be hands-on if you need it, if you need help. But if you don't, then you just report attendance and grades, and then there's no required testing. So we decided, so that was probably your IEP meeting is usually in January or February. Mm-hmm. So we had that meeting and discussed at that time that might be the best option. I was under the impression that if I had an umbrella school, that I would lose the services, because it would be considered she was enrolled in a private school, not homeschooled. But they said, no, that's not the case. We'll keep providing whatever. And then you can not have to do the test, which saves them, effort. So they were kind of on board for that. And there was no, like, in 5th grade, she scored off the charts. So there was no concern that she was behind. It may be different if your kid's academically behind in any way. Like, they would not be so open to that, but it worked out well for us. So we continued that. She didn't test in 9th grade. And then we just got ready for the ACT. That was the next test, or the PSAT. And so we worked with the testing coordinator at our local high school for those. And I actually knew her. She was a former student of mine. So it worked out well, because I could contact her, and she was very helpful. And so she helped arrange that. And then at that time, we arranged all of the readers and that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
So the human readers, that was part of her accommodation. She also had a Braille test. So we would recruit friends who were former teachers and that kind of stuff, who were very kind to come in and do, a test that was triple time. I can't imagine doing a physics exam that was how many hours?
Oh, I don't even remember.
It's like 9 hours or something.
Yeah, it was exhausting.
So you have to have good friends that will do those kinds of things. But we did recruit several people to come in and do the reading part. And like her ACT was done over 2-week, in a
Nice.
2-week window.
Mhm.
That was part of her accommodations, is she could do a 2-week window and have one subject per day. And instead of all of it in one, since she was getting extended time. And we found ACT to be a little bit easier to work with than the College Board at first. But then eventually, after working with the College Board, I think we had to appeal twice.
Yeah, and then once we got in touch with a real person,
And it wasn't
College
just
Board
an
was-
automatic refusal of
Mhm.
accommodations, and you got a real person. It really it progressed fine. There was still some issue with the AP Physics exam and stuff like that. So I think the actual process was she had to register for the exam online, pick her testing center. So I let her handle all that part, and she would pick our local high school. And then after she was registered, the testing coordinator could see that and then go ahead and start working on accommodations and that kind of stuff, and making sure that we got the Braille exam, ordering everything she needed to order. And but everything went really well, except for the one physics exam where they didn't send the script for the reader.
yeah, and I don't know, the graphs were ridiculous in that exam. I don't know what they were thinking, but
Yeah, sometimes equal isn't necessarily the best option. So if you're trying to have a physics problem about how a tractor works, having a tactile diagram of a tractor for a kid who's never seen a tractor, because she's never put her hands all over, she's ridden a tractor, we live in the country, but she hasn't put her hands all over a tractor to know what it looks like. So without the descriptive script, the graphics didn't make a lot of sense. So anyway, that was a kind of like a issue, but everything else worked really well. And even some of them she did digitally, because it was during COVID.
Mhm.
And so she had to do AP US history
Yeah,
and
so-
AP English.
yeah, and then AP English Literature and AP Gov, all of those virtually.
So she did those virtually, and they had like a virtual person on the other side, right?
No,
How did they know if you didn't cheat?
they used an they used an app, and I think like they track everything, like any kind of browser activity. They lock down your device when you're in the app.
And I think
And
if your head goes away or something, or
I don't think they did that with me, because my head would go away anyway, but I'm pretty sure that maybe they did use a camera, and then they also would probably just track I think they maybe even had a way to track your internet use if you used your phone.
so they have that figured out, I guess. That's not my job. But
Yeah,
anyway.
I don't even know how it all worked, but it worked.
And as far as prepping for those, ACT, okay, so SAT does not have a Braille practice exam. So you're just out of luck there. They have a digital version now, but back then, the digital version was like an audio book file.
Mhm.
So it wasn't even like usable with JAWS and that kind of stuff. Now it is, I'm pretty sure. It's been several years, but they do not have a Braille test. So you can't practice the graphs, you can't practice all of that. But they do offer a Braille test. They just don't have a practice test. So you have no way to practice how it's going to actually be. The ACT would give you one a year,
Mhm.
correct? So they would only publish one practice test. They would give you more, I'm assuming, but it'd be the same test again. So we used the one they gave us, and then we borrowed some from the School for the Blind,
Yeah.
older ones. They were a few years old. And then I would find the answers online, so I could grade her how she did on those. So that's how we practiced for those. And then you did the official ACT prep book.
Yes.
So it was on Bookshare, right?
Mhm.
So she worked through that. And of course, you can't really practice the graphs and stuff because the science section is all graphs. So that was really hard to practice without having an actual paper exam. I know you can take it digitally though. So if you're very good at tech, there's some way you can do the science section digitally.
I have no idea how that would work.
We were not that far in our tech skills yet. So, and I think they have the practice one online that you can do. And then for AP, we just called in a whole lot of favors, prepping for that. We did lit-based curriculum, but then we had a retired AP US history teacher that met with her, 2 or 3 times, just to kind of quiz her orally and make sure she didn't have any gaps.
Yeah.
I have a friend that teaches AP English, And so she shared some of her materials with us and we worked through that,
Yeah, and she would read my essays.
read her essays and give her some feedback. And then for calculus, she had Betsy through Tech Vision,
Mhm.
who helped her with that. And then we had another, like her friend who sat in the tests. She wasn't actually a calculus teacher,
Right.
but she was a math teacher, so she could kind of give some feedback too. And then I have another friend that I work with that's a math teacher who would help too.
Mhm.
So we kind of just, and it wasn't that they tutored her weekly or anything like that, but it was just reach out and ask some questions here and there.
Yeah, we crowdsourced a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot of crowdsourcing. And so she did good on all of those. She scored very well. She was AP Scholar of Distinction. Is that what it was called?
Mhm.
So, and then she scored well enough on the ACT to get into Harvard. So that worked. But it was mostly just her. I didn't sit and make her do any of that. I was like, okay, you have the ACT at the end of October. You can take this month to just prep for that and don't worry about doing any of your other curriculum. And that's a freedom that we have as homeschoolers, you know, and then we could pick it back up as soon as the ACT was over. So she could just take a month and prep, you know, and that's kind of what we did.
Mhm.
And it was nice to have that freedom.
Yeah.
To
I
be able
also,
to do that.
yeah, now that I think about it, especially when prepping for AP, I watched a lot of YouTube videos about people talking about AP prep. And I did some of that with ACT as well. So
And just
that was
like testing
helpful.
methods.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the best way, because I have no clue about that kind of stuff. And you'll notice I say I have no clue about a lot of things, but you know, I successfully homeschooled child to graduation. Because there's just so much out there that you can, all you have to be able to do is search for things and find resources. You don't have to be able to teach these things. We never had a moment where I sat and lectured her and drew on the board and just, which I wouldn't even done anything for you. I don't even do that for my sighted kid, you know? So it's not like a typical classroom. And I think it's hard for us to get out of the mindset because most of us have been in a typical classroom most of our lives. It's mostly just conversation based and just, you know, talking through what we're working on. Right.
Yeah.
And what classes she wanted to take and that kind of stuff. So, and which tests she wanted to take. Cause I didn't make her just take every AP exam. We just knew what resources we had and went with that. Like we wanted to do AP biology, for example, but we could not find an AP biology exam anywhere. I mean, a AP biology textbook anywhere. There was not one in Braille. So at that time, we were not confident enough with tech to be able to do an AP prep with tech,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So we just scrapped that idea and moved on. Same
Yeah.
with chemistry. We couldn't find an AP chemistry book. So she just did honors for those and
Mhm.
then dual enrollment biology
Mhm.
her senior year. So, and that was a great experience because she got lab experience and that kind of stuff. And our state pays for dual enrollment, so many classes. So you really want to utilize that because it's free college credit.
Yeah.
And then it was a great experience. She met wonderful professors, she's still friends with them,
Mhm.
and it worked out really well.
So you kind of mentioned a lot of the flexibility and testing and following Campbell's passion. So I'm going to kind of combine the next two is, you know, how did you choose what classes to teach in high school? And then throughout all of this, how did you test or make sure that she was learning and understanding the material in order to probably pass those classes as you would in a typical high school setting?
Well, when we were going into high school, I sat with a friend who teaches high school AP classes, and she had two daughters that one had just graduated college and one was going into college. So she had just done all of this, you know, like planned the whole high school. And I was like, okay, so what classes does Campbell need to take and in what order? So that she can do AP by her senior year. She was interested in doing AP. My other one is not necessarily interested. She wants to do more dual enrollment. So she just laid it out for me. She was like, okay, you do biology, algebra 1, blah, blah, you know, and we just laid out, this is 9th grade, this is 10th grade, this is 11th grade. And then we had some flexibility there. And then also she took a super senior year. So I think she had 40 something credits by the time she graduated. So
College. Well, no, not college.
you did
Yeah,
have 40
college
college credits, but then also 40 high school credits. So we just, you know, kind of went by that plan, but then based on what textbooks we could get in Braille and that kind of stuff, it you know, adjusted a little bit. But it's basically, you can find that information online. So now that I know, I could have looked at, say, Harvard, which we didn't even know at the time she was going to apply to Harvard, but I could see what they recommend for, you know, high school path, and you can find that anywhere. But that's kind of how we decided what to do and which classes to take, don't you think?
Yeah.
As far as testing her, I never tested her, and I know that sounds terrible to most people who are just accustomed to tests, but I don't have 30 kids to monitor, so I can have a conversation with her at any time, and she's naturally interested in these topics. So when she's reading something about mad cow disease, she loved to tell me about how disgusting mad cow disease is. And you know, anything that she was learning. And my other child's the same way. You know, we're in the van literally sitting this close to each other while she's reading her science, and then she's like, Mom, did you know blah blah blah, you know? So I know they're learning it because they're talking to me about it, you know. So I rarely graded anything except math, like every once in a while. And then it got to the point where she could just grade her own math, and my other one grades her own math.
Yeah.
And if she misses something, she goes back in and works on it.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, if I had falsified any of my, you know, grades, I guess, or said that I'd gotten something correct when I didn't, that would be completely on me. Like that, I would be the one who paid the consequences for that, because I was the one who took the AP exam. So
it just didn't make sense for her to cheat. You
Yeah.
know, it doesn't make sense for anybody to cheat, you know, because you're just harming yourself. But I guess because she's intelligent enough to realize that I didn't really have to monitor a lot. And because she would just talk about everything.
and when I worked with math tutors and things, they would, you know, the one was my dad's old calculus teacher, as we said, I think in a previous video. And then one was my teacher from Tech Vision. When I worked with them, they would have me turn in things to them. And of course, I would talk about the concepts that I was learning with them. And so they kind of gave me the clear as well.
And then also, when you were working with Denise at Tech Vision, she had you learn to cite sources and that kind of stuff. So she would make you kind of write a little paper.
Right.
And then like cite the sources correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's those kinds of things that you need some, you know, accountability, not necessarily accountability, but excuse me, just feedback, you know, to make sure you're doing it right. And so if there was any question, she would ask and say, does this sound right to you or whatever? But and a lot of things, like as she was learning them, like I said, she would deep dive into it. So we would research it together. And then the way that our science and history curriculum were designed, it was that they had video links, so like YouTube and stuff. So because there's a 6-year age gap between the two of them, at lunchtime, if we were home, we would watch CNN 10 and then talk about that. And I would have to describe a lot of it because it's very visual. But then also we'd watch the videos together so I could describe those for her physics and biology and, you know, whatever other she was doing. So I was seeing what she was learning because the videos, you know, went with whatever she was reading, and we would talk about it. And I learned so much that I did not know, that I did not learn in school. Just watching those videos of them, you know.
Yeah.
So, and then that's basically it, because when you only have 2 kids, grades are kind of goofy, you know, because you can see what they're doing. I had to give them a grade because the transcript is required. So basically we call it teaching to mastery. So once if she missed a math problem, she went back in and learned how to do it, and then did it again, a different one in the same, you know, style of problem. And then we didn't move on until she was comfortable with that. And then we move on to the next thing. And then, you know, so that's your teaching to mastery at that point. And once you finish the curriculum, you've mastered it, you know, so you get an A, and that's just kind of how it worked.
And I think dual enrollment is good as well, because then you can see how well what you've been doing can directly translate to college grades. And that worked out well for me. So I think That was probably the closest thing to any kind of assessment that we ever did.
Yeah, besides the ACT, I mean,
Yeah,
you took that when you were how old? 16.
16.
So, if she's, scoring in the top 1% of the country and at 16, then I'm not real concerned that she's not learning the material. Not to say that standardized tests are the best way to indicate what you've learned, but I wasn't ever concerned enough to feel like we needed to do anything else to